Hello, I'm Jacob Moss and I'm an accredited lecturer of the Art Society. Relatively soon after joining the directory, COVID really started to tighten its grip upon the nation, and so most of my talks have taken place by virtual means. But I'm pleased to say that hasn't prevented me from achieving my principal aim, which is to illuminate a subject I've spent the past 10 years studying in my role as curator at the Fan Museum in Greenwich. Now, I'm going to assume that most of you watching this presentation will know relatively little about fans, so you'll just have to trust me when I say they are infinitely more interesting than you could possibly imagine. One 18th century poet went so far as to call fans the noblest inventions of the human mind. The Fan Museum's exceptional collections encompass more than 7,000 fans and related material dating from the 12th century right up to the present day and gathered from most parts of the world. That said, I'll be sharing with you just one fan from the collections, and my intention is to explore that object from multiple perspectives. I'm going to tell you something about its composition and construction before highlighting the colourful subject matter which decorates its pleated leaf. And really what I'd like to do is demonstrate in a relatively short amount of time is that beyond cooling, fans tie into a surprisingly broad range of subjects. Fashion, craftsmanship, art history, social history, world events, religion, politics, celebrity, to name but a few. And so, without further ado, let's take our first look at my chosen fan, handcrafted in England around the middle of the 18th century. Now, the 18th century is widely regarded as the fans' golden age, a moment in time when their popularity peaks and the craft of fan making achieves a pinnacle of brilliance. Fans were first conceived, of course, with practicality in mind. By the middle of the 18th century, however, their functions had broadened considerably. Through elaborate modes of construction and lavish ornamentation, fans reference the social status, the tastes and the personal style of the ladies who carried them. They mostly echo the prevailing fashions of their associated period, and we'll come to talk more about the iconography which decorates this particular fan and how that relates more broadly to 18th century taste in due course. But first, I'd like to deal with two interlinking questions. How and from what materials is the article made? Put simply, this is a folding fan of the pleated variety. It's formed of two components. A set of sticks, commonly referred to as a monture, provides structural support to an arc-shaped pleated leaf. The sticks are fashioned from ivory and skillfully worked into rhythmic rococo forms enlivened with miniature painted motifs, including musical instruments and livestock. The central part of the monture, referred to as the gorge, is delicately fretted and carved with vignettes. A pastoral in the centre, flanked on either side with scenic Chinese landscapes. The pleated leaf is made of animal skin, most likely calf or kid skin, and the design is executed in gouache, watercolour and gold paint. Let's turn briefly to look upon the plainer opposite side, viewed principally by the person carrying the fan. The parts of the sticks, referred to as the ribs, are glued onto the leaf, which, unlike the public-facing side, is only sparsely painted. When the leaf is single and the ribs visible on the reverse side, the fan is said to be mounted à l'anglaise in the English manner, whereas fans of a similar period, but made in France, usually combine two leaves, pasted together with the sticks inserted between the two. Regardless of whether it were made in France, England, or for that matter any other nation where fan making occurred, the production of a typical folding fan in the 18th century required the involvement of numerous individuals, each contributor responsible for a particular aspect of workmanship. The sticks, for example, were made by specialist carvers, metalworkers and jewellers, whilst the leaves were the domain of an entirely separate group of craftspeople, including painters, gilders, pleaters, and not forgetting the assemblers. Diderot's Encyclopedia of Arts and Trades, also published around the middle of the 18th century, offers a rare window onto a fan-making workshop, albeit in France, where activities were conducted and regulated according to guild statutes. A series of wonderfully detailed images shows workers busying themselves with the preparation and assemblage of folding fans. At the lower end of the production chain, a group of women prepare the sheets used to make the fan leaves. Another plate illustrates a fan painter who carries out her work within a brightly lit and comfortably furnished room. Sitting behind a desk, she's seen painting a fan leaf. Directly in front of that desk is an easel supporting a fan-shaped frame within which we can assume is the design she's tasked with copying. In fact, copying reproduction prints of popular paintings was a common practice among 18th century fan painters, and it's evident that prints were the source of at least some of the images which decorate the folding fan we'll soon return to explore in more detail. But first, I'd like to expand a little on the topic of fan painters, or more specifically, those active in England during the 18th century, of which I'm afraid we know relatively little about. Almost never did they sign their work, which points to a lesser status in comparison to printmakers and fine artists, for example. Indeed, the London Tradesman, published in 1757, summarily dismisses fan painting as a trifling, that is to say, trivial branch of the arts, which requires, and I quote, "no great fancy nor skill in drawing or painting to make a workman." We know that by the middle of the 18th century, at least some of England's fan painters were struggling to maintain a decent living. The main threats to their livelihood came in the form of cheap fans imported in vast quantities from the Far East, and the rising popularity of fans incorporating printed rather than hand-painted leaves. One particularly aggrieved fan painter published anonymously in 1751 a pamphlet in which they set out the declining state of England's fan trade, and about printed fans they had this to say: "Ladies of quality, down to the kitchen maids, are pleasing themselves with the cheapness of their bargains." It's an interesting comment because it points toward a democratisation or a levelling out of the fan from being an article associated exclusively with the aristocracy to one which is carried by a significantly broader swathe of 18th century society. So let's circle back now to our mid-18th century fan and talk more about the colourful composition which decorates its pleated leaf. The design incorporates a medley of trompe-l'oeil prints designed to trick the eye. Arranged in a seemingly haphazard manner, they overlap, curl at the edges, and appear to lift away from the leaf itself. In between the prints, the spaces are painted with delicate florals, probably rendered by a different hand than the one that paints the main part of the design. The subjects and supplementary motifs which make up the overall scheme at first glance appear unconnected from one another, but in fact tap into the broader cultural interests, pastimes and social preoccupations of polite society in the 18th century. The central framed image shows two children enjoying an audience with their mother. The formality of the scene strikes a contrast to how members of the same modern-day family might expect to interact with one another. Another scene depicts two costume characters from a commedia dell'arte, a popular form of Italian theatre, to the right of which we see a woman playing shepherdess. This image replicates aspects of a mezzotint by the printmaker Richard Houston, and in particular the scene of haymaking in the background, which conjures an idealised vision of 18th century rural life. At the opposite side of the leaf, within an oval frame, is a portrait of Maria Gunning, Countess of Coventry, an actress who travelled in the company of her sister Elizabeth from Dublin to London in 1751, seeking fame and fortune. The image is copied from a mezzotint by an unknown artist, an adaptation of an earlier print by James McArdle. The original link in this chain of artistic replication is a delicate pastel portrait of the Countess by the English painter and Royal Academician Francis Coates. This original portrait forms part of the collection at Croom Court, the ancestral seat of the Earl of Coventry, who Maria married in 1752, relatively soon after her arrival in London. During her lifetime, the Countess was a well-known figure. If she were alive today, we would no doubt refer to her as an A-list celebrity, and for this reason, her image was widely circulated via printed media. Her story ends on a tragic note when, at the age of just 28, she dies from consumption, thought to be caused, or at least worsened, by the lead-based cosmetics she's persistently applied to her face. And it's with the untimely demise of the Countess Maria that I'd like to bring my presentation to a close. Hopefully, I've been able to show that beyond cooling, fans have their own particular stories to tell, and I quote, may justly be entitled one of the noblest inventions of the human mind. Now, if I've piqued your interest and you'd like to learn more about the multi-layered history of fans and the craft of fan making, then I suggest a visit to the Fan Museum's website, where you can search the collection's database, and perhaps check in with my profile on the Art Society directory, where you'll find all of my fan-related lectures listed and described in detail. And of course, when the Fan Museum is able to reopen, which I sincerely hope will occur relatively soon, we'd be delighted to welcome you in person, where I guarantee you'll leave with a newfound admiration for the artistry of fans throughout the ages. Thank you.